Hello everybody, hope you're sitting comfortably. My name is Lucy Orta. I'm Chair of Art in the Environment at the University of the Arts London and a Professor at the Centre for Sustainable Fashion. Now I'm going to switch through to my slides and take you through this presentation which is titled Democracy and Activism. Thank you. In 1992, I co-founded Studio Orta with my partner Jorge Orta. Jorge began his career in Argentina during the dictatorship regime, which lasted from 1970 to 1982, and he moved to Paris in 1983. I left England after my studies as a fashion knitwear designer at Nottingham Trent University. I went to work in the Paris fashion houses in the early 90s. It's here that I met Jorge, and I began collaborating with him and gradually transitioned into the field of contemporary visual arts. I began to develop a research practice that explores forms of contemporary art that are both representational and operational. This has been termed operational aesthetics by the art historian and critic Niccolò Borio. We are motivated by these four questions. How can art practice pave a new critical role faced with the growing problems in this world? And how can it erase the contradictions between formal aesthetics and social function? And how can artworks empower and nurture constructive dialogue? And what contribution can we make as artists to human and environmental sustainability? Our artwork is widely exhibited in galleries and museums worldwide, but these public presentations represent just a fraction of our multifaceted studio production. We strive to create artistic forms that speak different visual languages within different contexts and to communicate with a huge diversity of audiences. Sometimes these presentations are within the confines of the white cube or the gallery, but more often they can be found in the intimacy of the home, the playground or the public space, or interacting with the wider community through participatory methods such as social practice. As you can see from the website page here, we work with all kinds of mediums. This can be drawing, printing, welding, carpentry, embroidering, installation, glass performance, you name it. We've tackled almost every medium available. We're conscious that the vast array of resulting artifacts cannot just represent our complex and changing times. On the contrary, they should be active within people's lives, reactive to, and act as trigger catalysts for solutions for society at large. The website is a resource that you can consult, and you can find out about the different projects and also download articles and publications. Today I'll be speaking about the bodies of work circled, which relate specifically to my interest in clothing and textile crafts as powerful tools for democracy and activism within contemporary art. When I arrived in Paris, I was beginning to make a successful career in the Parisian fashion houses when the first Gulf War exploded. This was followed by a stock market crash and the consequences of the devastating economic recession. My encounter with Jorge triggered this gradual transition away from fashion design into contemporary art, inspired by his politically facing work and an increasing need to become more socially active. I looked for new creative mediums with which to express the effects of the social instability around me. The first visual manifestation of my work was the habit tent, a portable habitat designed for minimal personal comfort and urgent mobility for nomadic populations. Habit implies a garment for meditation and a spiritual refuge. The inhabitant suggests a human presence as an occupant for the dwelling. The aluminium-coated one-person tent with its telescopic armatures transforms into a matter of seconds into a poncho. This work was a dual response to the global crisis, the humanitarian aid appeals for shelter and clothing for the refugees fleeing the Iraqi war zones, and in Paris, the increasing numbers of homeless people on the streets. Using my design expertise, I went on to explore further individual convertible shelters. These became known as Refuge wear. The forms allow for the minimum vital space around the body, and the materials are chosen for their metaphorical properties. They incorporate armatures that raise the fabric above the chest to eliminate the effects of claustrophobia, and they have supporting structures that are lightweight and telescopic, evoking pop-up architecture. Sleeping bags convert into backpacks and anoraks. This transformation from shelter to clothing and vice versa is fundamental to the concept of freedom of movement, free will or choice, new relationships and new cultural exchanges. What I was embarking on was a research process, and in 1993 I was invited to exhibit Refuge wear at the Salvation Army shelter in Paris. This is called the Cité de Refuge. This exhibition marked the 60th anniversary of the hostel, which is designed by Le Corbusier. On one of the Refuge wear bivouacs suspended in the entrance hall of the hostel was a silkscreen printed text: "Living without shelter for prolonged periods rapidly deteriorates physical and moral health. The lack of adequate sleep increases stress, weakens the immune system, and accelerates the loss of identity and desocialization." These artworks became the focal point for discussions with the residents, and so we decided to create a series of drop-in workshops to channel emotions through dialogue, drawing, and poetry. This led naturally to a series of Refuge wear trials with the residents, and here we recorded testimonies about the homeless experiences and collected suggestions on how the precarious conditions could be ameliorated with numerous stopgap solutions, as the system was dismally failing them. These emotional encounters marked a change in the studio practice, as it became apparent that workshops were more than just an artist offering a skill. It was a highly rewarding creative exchange. And reiterating the words of the director of the Salvation Army, he says, "I'm convinced today that in launching of socialization, it is difficult to have access and go towards art and culture. They must come towards our public. Culture must be included in the world of exclusion." Because of the positive reception of the work on exhibition, the director of the Salvation Army invited me back to work with the residents. Firstly, I gathered ideas from responsive discussions with the staff and hostel residents. One of the ideas was to stage a fashion show to draw attention to the growing homeless issues. But as the Refuge wear work was not conceived as clothing or objects of fashion, I didn't think it was appropriate. So instead, I proposed a new workshop idea that would include elements of fashion, that is, designing clothes and a catwalk, but instead it would be based on a more sociological approach to designing clothes, as the making process would involve interrogating self-identity. The workshop became known as Identity plus Refuge, and I based the idea on emerging social design enterprises, which would use design practice as a method for upskilling and employment opportunities. The Paris Salvation Army had a huge warehouse of donated surplus clothing, and staff would sort and select items for the thrift store. I was shocked when I saw clothes go into the garbage, either because they were out of fashion or damage. For me, they had the potential to become something new, in the same manner that the residents could learn skills through making, regain confidence, and eventually become reinserted through mentoring and training programs. To trial the idea, I set up a clothes transformation workshop in the basement of the Salvation Army. I collected all the discarded items, zippers that no longer zipped, ties that were too wide, gloves and belts that were too small, fur coats with no fur, socks with holes. For the workshop, I proposed a basic method of transformation, to examine the morphology of a garment shape as a starting point, breaking it into components and trying not to discard any part. The idea was that we could take something discarded and give it a new life, and that through this positive transformation process, perhaps it was possible to shape a new identity both for the clothes and for the participants involved. I believe that through developing creativity and by pairing this with training activities such as reconditioning or manufacturing, this could eventually lead to reinsertion. What I was doing was social practice, using creativity as a starting point, and the co-creation methodologies I put into place could potentially be applied to different disciplines. I think it's important to note that this was in 1995. Today, social design practice is a burgeoning area of investigation, but at the time, this was extremely innovative. Again, the director of the Salvation Army was a huge inspiration. He deeply believed in the power of art and culture to bring about change, and the role of the artist was to bring culture to the doorsteps of minorities, and to implicate them in the process. The mobilising effect of this project swept across the whole of the Salvation Army. After several months, we successfully staged a fashion show in the thrift store. The staff helped rearrange the furniture for the catwalk with rugs, sofas and chairs, and they repaired the broken lamps and radios so that we could use them on the night as audio and lighting. The show was part of Paris Fashion Week and was positively reviewed in the fashion press, and even later the garments copied by Martin Margiela. Although a social enterprise couldn't be realised because the thrift store was eventually closed down, the ripple effect of Identity Refuge is far-reaching. Identity Refuge has been presented worldwide and has been an inspiration for numerous designers who have gone on to create social enterprises, with women in prisons, for example, and the favelas of Brazil, and the Making for Change unit at London College of Fashion works on a similar principle. Meeting urban philosopher Paul Virilio in 1994 was a significant turning point in my practice. His research focused on the breakdown of the family unit and the need to reconstruct the social link. He says, "The precarious nature of society is no longer that of the unemployed or the abandoned, but that of individuals socially alone." I realised that the refuge wear and survival kits that I'd been creating were concerned with the notion of individual survival, but it became really apparent that I should be investigating the role of the individual within a community structure, the collective body. And Virilio's philosophy and social criticism encouraged me to explore new structures and processes for stimulating dialogue and interaction. I went on to create body architecture, these larger scale domes and collective tent-like sculptures that seek to promote the opposite effect of the individual refuge wear works. The first in the series was body architecture, and here it's exhibited at the Modern Art Museum in Paris. The surface skins of these architectures have many facets and appendages, kinds of demi-bodies that represent individuals within a community, at the same time evoke the complexities of shared space. Each individual keeps an eye on and protects the other. One individual's life depends on the life of the other. In Lucy's work, the warmth of one gives warmth to the other. The physical link weaves a social link. Again, this is Virilio commenting when I first began physically connecting people together. The body of work, Nexus architecture, is regarded as an emblem of my practice. Nexus means link or bond, and the symbolic content is more important than the functional. In this work, clothing becomes a medium through which social links and bonds are visualized, both literally and metaphorically. The links of the zippers and channels, while enhancing the uniformity of the worker's uniform, create androgynous shapes that defy classification. They attempt to give form to the social, not the individual body. The connecting elements are direct embodiments of the social link, a social sculpture worn in public spaces and used for ephemeral performances in different locations. During the different performances, performers and passers-by become physically involved in the construction of each scenario, which is filmed and photographed, climbing into the suits, zippering the nexus and moving in unison, creating an unusual closeness, questioning interdependence by being part of it, physical and visceral. The recurring public manifestations create a poetic series of interrelated segments, regardless of sex, religion, age or social status. For the second Johannesburg Biennial Commission in 1999, I chose to use traditional textiles from the colourful Dutch wax prints and African kangas purchased in local markets, and these formed the basis of a community workshop with female migrant labourers from a local shelter. In Johannesburg, the Nexus architecture experience produced the most beautiful suits, but more importantly, it was a process of bringing forth the possibility of solidarity in a fractured environment where solidarity can be difficult to muster and maintain. The Connector Mobile Village is a long-term project that has evolved through a huge diversity of workshops. Participants are invited to design a living unit or a pod, and I try best to interpret and fabricate them to add to the collective structure. To add complexity and flexibility, I designed a system of linear modules, these are the ones in orange and blue, and nodes, those are the green and the orange, onto which the individual pods can be connected. The basic protocol for connection is a zipper. which allows for each unit to be connected or disconnected from the sequence. This generates an infinite possibility for configurations, and the connector structure can expand according to the communities involved. Metaphorically, the village is made up of a network of pods, passages, and intermingling relationships. Connector Mobile Village began in the year 2000, and it wasn't until 2013 that we had the opportunity to bring the many modules together, and this is at the Zhejiang Art Museum in Hangzhou in China. I'll show you a few more of the examples that weren't included in that exhibition. On the left are the guardian angels. These represent the symbol of the historical center of Mexico City. In this workshop, we collaborated with not-for-profit arts organizations in the Zocalo district, where crime and poverty are at its highest density. We invited the local community of prostitutes and street kids to talk about their experiences living and working on the streets of Mexico City. And we commissioned a local ex-voto painter to depict the scenes onto the canvases that were transformed into these angels. These were then presented in a public exhibition to raise awareness to their situation and draw attention to the work of the charity supporting the community. On the right are the units designed by young fashion students from a college in Cholet in France. The long arms denote the need to reach out and connect to others. For this connector workshop, we collaborated with the residents from the Robert Griffard Psychiatric Hospital in Quebec, alongside artists from the Folie Culture, a local not-for-profit organisation dedicated to raising awareness and disseminating information about mental health. Together we created a series of painted canvases based on the symbol of the heart and empathy. They were then transformed into individual units that could be joined back onto the connector structure. The shape of the unit is based on the security blankets, which are used to avoid some patients harming themselves, a powerful reminder of the conditions affecting some of the residents. At the end of the project, which lasted several months, the general public were invited to attend an open day inside the hospital, where a group of local dancers performed in the units to draw attention to the painful social issues and raise public awareness. As you might remember, the first work I made, The Habitant, responded to the Iraq War, and after many years of the war raging, the end of the war and the transfer of sovereignty to the Iraqi people was declared in 2004. To mark this occasion, I created the performance Portable Protest. It was commissioned by the Victoria and Albert Museum 5 days before the withdrawal of the US and Allied forces. Together with 50 volunteer performers, we staged a passive protest for peace, wearing gold-printed combat suits, for over 2 hours amongst the tombs, sepulchres and war trophies from historical and battles and conflicts. We silently meditate the past atrocities and the future fate of Iraq and its citizens. In 2007, the costumes were used for a number of public performances. The most revelatory was a verbatim play, Fallujah. The script by the playwright Dr. Jonathan Holmes is made up of declassified military recordings and local testimonies during the bombardment of Fallujah. This is one of the deadliest battles during the Iraq War. It was here that we learnt about the use of chemical weapons on the citizens. The Lifeguard series has been one of the foci of my research as professor at London College of Fashion. Like Nexus architecture, it's an adaptation of the workers overall, which becomes both object-based and performative. The garment is incorporated into Red Cross Army surplus, such as the stretcher beds that you can see here. These form both a supportive structure for the wearer and a transportable aid device for the bearer. Lifeguard formed the central discourse of my exhibition in the Curve Gallery at the Barbican Centre in London in 2005. It's comprised of 23 suspended stretcher beds incorporating 50 figures. This work reflects on the notion of assistance and the assisted. Here the body is not only understood as a measure of one's capacity to overcome ordeals or to support others in distress, but also as a fragile structure to be preserved. These more recent Lifeguard works resulted from a commission to imagine a series of sculptures for the exhibition Sustainable Thinking at the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence. The sculptures are based on the allegoric depictions of the 4 elements in the Renaissance fresco paintings that adorn the palace walls. Instead of the 4 elements, I created 4 lifeguards that refer to natural resources that are threatened: biodiversity, water, air, and energy. Echoing the mythological gods and divinities depicted in the frescoes, these works are surrounded by an array of symbolic and functional objects, referencing the increasing fragility of these vital resources due to factors such as exploitation and climate change. And they evoke the need to develop more sustainable ways of using, protecting, and conserving these resources in the future. The human figure of the Amazonia Lifeguard has assembled a colourful, diverse collection of species and laid them out on the linen tarpaulin. Early herbalists and botanists collected species for medicinal study purposes, and here the association with the original function of the Red Cross stretcher bed reminds us of the wounded body in need of treatment and care. Likewise, the Amazon rainforest, planet Earth's vital organ, is under threat, with consequences that will have an irrevocable effect on the health of our human species. In 2014, the Nuit Blanche Calgary commissioned me to imagine an all-night-long performance for their public art festival. In order to embed the work in the local context, I spent several months in residence between the city of Calgary and the Banff Centre in the National Park. I conducted research at Glenbow and Fort Calgary museums and worked with academics and students at the Alberta College of Art and Design. We collected visual and textual source material which focused on the history of the trade between the First Nation peoples and the early European settlers. Through interviews with First Nation leaders, I learnt about the point blanket, a vital economic commodity in the early 19th century. The trade of the point blanket represents the encroachment of the so-called New World upon traditional cultures, rituals, and landscapes. The wool blankets were woven in northern England and traded for beaver pelts in Calgary. The blanket became the capote, a so-called democratic garment worn by both cultures. Felt became the central trope in my dramatised performance, Symphony for Absent Wildlife, an interwoven narrative about the disappearance of peoples and wildlife. The tailcoats and masks of the orchestra of the 20 musicians are all made of felt. The animal masks are inspired by the headgear of the medicine man and represent species that are threatened. During the all-night performance, the orchestra plays a symphony on wooden bird whistles that replicates the dawn chorus. Over the course of the night, it builds to a crescendo before abruptly ending to evoke the loss of nature and that of traditional cultures due to man's exploitation. This is one of my most recent works in collaboration with the London College of Fashion Centre for Social Impact. Procession banners marks the 100th anniversary of the Representation of the People's Act. It's a parliamentary act which gave some women over the age of 30 the suffrage, the right to vote. During their struggle to obtain the vote, protest marches were one of the methods suffragettes across England used to gain attention. And banner making was often conducted in union groups. The artist Mary Lowndes became very involved in this movement and provided drawings and instructions to groups for making banners. Suffragettes was the militant group of women. They branched off from the pacifists and used sabotage, window smashing, and artisanal bombs to gain attention. As a result, over 1,000 women were sent to prisons across the UK, and Holloway Prison in London was the most notorious. To recognise locations and moments in history of significance, London College of Fashion received a commission from Historic England to engage with women in prisons, and I was the artist chosen to work with HMP Downview, using Mary Lowndes as an inspiration for the Procession banners. In 2014, London College of Fashion Centre for Social Impact established a training and manufacturing unit at Holloway Prison. This was called Making for Change. Here, women prisoners were trained in basic manufacturing and pattern cutting skills to equip them with employability certifications before the end of their sentence. When Holloway closed in 2016, the training unit was moved to HMP Downview in Sutton. These are images of the Making for Change unit there. The unit involves around 30 women, and for such a significant commission, I thought it would be important to collect as many voices as possible from amongst the female prisoners. With Historic England, we designed a questionnaire resource pack, and Women in the Making for Change unit manufactured 350 beautiful tote bags in the suffragette colours. We inserted a colouring book, information about the suffragette movement, and the novel How to Be a Feminist. 350 women at Downview had the opportunity to respond. They could join activities that we organised across the prison, making banner workshops, creative writing, handcrafts, or just simply filling out the questionnaire. The responses and feedback received form the basis of the iconography for the banner workshops. These are some of the questions we asked the women. What words best describe the suffragettes? What could freedom and equality mean for women today? What does freedom signify to you beyond Downview? And what image or picture symbolises freedom or has a special meaning? And here are some of the responses from the workshops and the questionnaire. You can see 4 designs, interpretations from the images and symbols, colours that were sent by the women. And on the top right is the Holloway banner. This is an embroidered banner that bears the names of 80 suffragettes who went on hunger strike in Holloway jail between 1909 and 1910. We're inspired by this banner to create our own, and I sent out samples to women not engaged in the workshops across HMP Downview, and each woman embroidered their name onto the piece of linen, and we assembled them together in Making for Change. And then on the bottom is Nicola's responsive poetry and the design which became one of the final banners. Here are images of the work in progress. We invited students from across London College of Fashion to become involved in the banner making process. These included the fashion psychology students, fashion accessory and design, fashion photography, and fashion futures. The tasks that we set the women could be completed in the group workshops or back in their cells, such as pom-pom making and embroidery. It was exciting to see the process come together over the months and for the women to feel part of something much larger, and their pride to express the collective voices of the women of HMP Downview. And this is the mass procession, celebrating the centenary of the right to vote in June 2018. Across England, 90,000 women came out onto the streets with their banners. And we were super proud to process the banners made at HMP Downview. This is one of the quotes from the women in the workshop. Learning about the suffragettes and making the procession banners has been very empowering for me. Before joining the workshops, I hadn't really thought about how much things have and haven't changed. Being in prison, we lose our families and kids. We no longer have a voice. Working with Lucy gave us confidence. She spoke to us like individuals. We were treated like human beings. The friendships we made with other participants through the craft-making activities help us to express ourselves. Sometimes we had bad weeks and we were low, but we were bonded. The group clicked emotionally and mentally. We lifted up each other. Representing the women of HMP Downview, and for all the women out there, made us proud of how far we have come along. A year later, the banners went on tour to contemporary art venues, including the Icon Gallery and the Delaware Pavilion, and even to Buckingham Palace. And women who had finished their sentence were able to attend the exhibitions. We collected feedback. Here is one of the quotes. Seeing the banners actually moved me to tears. The possibility and opportunity for change for women in prison. Procession banners concludes the first part of my presentation. This is devoted to my research that explores textiles and clothing with an aim to expand the definition and role that clothes can play within our society. It touches upon their powerful communicative aspects, their role in the construction of individual and collective identities, and how we can harness the power that clothing exerts on us through its extreme diversity and universality in ways which can alter our daily actions or perhaps even change society. And finally, and very briefly, I would like to end the presentation with some examples of artists that I've been supporting over the last 25 years. 30 of these are listed in the catalogue, Art, Fashion and Identity, which can be loaned from the LCF library, or again you can download it as a PDF from my website. The catalogue accompanied the exhibition I co-curated with Gabby Scardi at the Royal Academy of the Arts in London. This was in 2010. I'll show you 3 examples. Alicia Framis. For the last 20 years, she's created many works that champion women's rights. In Life Dress, she uses technology, activism and performance to address inequality in the workplace. The fabric of these dresses are made with airbags, which inflates according to aggressive behaviour. Each design has been made to reflect a different type of harassment. This work also connects back to her anti-dog collection, which is made from bulletproof material to protect women against violence. Maya Bajović's work directly comments on recent history, such as identity, tragedy, destiny, and the construction and deconstruction of history. She's especially interested in foregrounding women and minority populations who have been excluded from cultural and historical narratives. In this collaborative performance lasting 5 days, Maya worked with 5 women war refugees from the 90s Balkan conflict. They embroidered patterns onto the scaffold netting of the Gallery of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is undergoing reconstruction. Maya uses traditional folklore embroidery to frame the gallery and to draw attention to the ancient and rich history of her country. At the same time, she makes very public the relationship between masculine work of the builder, represented by the scaffold, and the feminine handiwork of the embroiderers. She continues to work with the refugees today. Amela Jasma has been known for her complex costume installations that draw attention to forms of cultural and racial diversity embedded within clothing, as well as social and ecological issues. For In Ravel Out, she took the ephemeral life of an object as a starting point. Instead of plastic bags, she used bags made from the processed cassava, which is dissolvable in water. Inside the bags are outdated copies of the Indonesian newspaper Tempo, which is no longer published in hard copy. The papers allude to the transitory nature of current events, to human memory and the passage of time, and our effort to understand these things creates a sense of unravelling, which is the title of the work. In her recent work, Feed the Nation, she explores how bodies relate to the world through the perspective of food and water. By serving water, the 2 costumes operate as a contemporary offering, while questioning the relationship between those who serve and those who consume. The female body and breasts explores the tension between our lust for consumption, and of course the exploitation of women, and the basic needs required for basic human survival and dignity. I'd like to leave you with some resources. There are numerous catalogues and publications that we have available on PDF, and they can be downloaded on the Studio Orta website. Well, thank you so much for listening today. And if you'd like to ask me any questions, please do send me an email at l.orta@fashion.arts.ac.uk. Thanks and have a lovely day.